Okay, friends, we're going to duke it out. The pantry versus the freezers. Yeah, the pantry versus the freezers. Enough. Enough of the little unicorns, like Patera always says. Enough about the little unicorns. I am going to really sit down and give you, friends, some solid practical advice. Long-term, short-term, daily food preservation. Because you know what? When you are looking at a self-sustainable homestead, or just homesteading in general, on or off the grid, food storage is going to be one of your #1 priorities. Can you do it without a pantry? Should you put your food in a freezer? Okay, time for straight talk. So we're trying to give practical advice, and we've been there and we've done that. And now we're going to tell you, don't do this because we've done it and it doesn't work. Here's the freezer story. We came all the way from Wisconsin, across the whole United States, hauling a freezer. Can you believe that? Oh yeah, we hauled our freezer out here. And the plan was we were going to erect the solar panels, get all of that going, and we would keep that freezer running because we still were in the freezer mentality. It wasn't a big freezer, but we still had the freezer mentality. It's like we couldn't let it go. It was like an addiction. We had the neighbors offer to keep our freezer until this place was finished. Because when we came out here, there was no electricity, no water, nothing. It was rough. You talk about roughing it. We were roughing it here. So they graciously offered. But here was the reality of that gracious offer. Because when we started going down there to get our stuff out of the freezer, yeah, it just wasn't a good plan. Let's just put it that way. I drive down there with the truck and, they're playing outside. They're barbecuing. They got guests over. Back then I didn't have like texting. So I'd show up and, I felt awkward. I felt uncomfortable, even though they were very down the road. It wasn't like I could just walk up my door and get whatever I wanted in the freezer. So there was time and effort. So now I'm relying on my pickup truck to drive me down there. I'm relying on me having some time to go down there and get it. And then, the timing of the food. I'm going to pull out a big chicken out of there. So I got to plan my meal for the day. I got to drive down to the neighbors, get the chicken out unthawed. And living up here off the grid, that just wasn't working. And we got to thinking, like, this is not a good plan. This whole freeze, even though we got free electricity and it's on the grid. That struck us as we're really putting ourselves in a vulnerable position. And even though we knew it was probably short term, because we were trying to get this homestead up and running, even short term, it was hitting a chord with us that wasn't feeling good. So what do? We right away, this only lasted for like 2 weeks. We smartened up. After 2 weeks, we smartened up and we got all of our stuff out of that freezer, brought it up here to the homestead, and guess what I brought out? My canners. Starry started canning. And that's where it really all began. I canned before, but man, I tell you what, I started canning, and I'll tell you what, that was a freeing feeling. It was like another step closer to real self-reliance and self-sustainability, off the grid. No more depending on the neighbor. No more driving. No more planning. No more. We were taking the bull by the horns. And that, my friends, is what you have to do. This is how you have to view your preparation for your homestead. Really. Use us as the example, because that was a great learning experience. And then we took this room, which was actually supposed to be a bedroom. This was originally a bedroom. And we converted it into the biggest pantry that we could think of. And Mr. Hiller put all the shelves in, and these are deep. We're holding so much food. If I counted all the jars that we have here, all the food, and this is long-term, short-term, and we've got, you name it. There's a lot of room in here, a lot of produce, a lot of everything, and then we also have other storage places. But this became the priority. The pantry, building our homestead around the pantry became the priority, and no more leaving to go down the road. So think about that. Very important, because when you are looking around and researching and thinking about ideas, people are doing it differently out there. And that's okay. But we look at it as, ooh, they're really at risk. That's not making sense. Why would you set it up that way? And our philosophy is set it up right. Set it up so that you don't put yourself at risk, that you're always getting all the bases covered. And that's how we look at things. Just it's a different philosophy and a different way of thinking, but you got to do it. And now let's just talk about the freezer in general, because we need an honest freezer talk. Because I come from a freezer background. My mom had a freezer, although she had a huge pantry. She had a freezer. Yeah, everybody I know had a freezer. But these are the things that I hated about the freezer. And let's raise your hand and all admit this. How many of you have succumbed to freezer burn? You know, you leave the stuff in there too long, it gets freezer burned. Okay, there's a loss there. How many of you have found like a piece of salmon that you bought 2 years ago on the bottom of the freezer? You lose stuff in the sea of the freezer. How does it happen? I don't know, right? Come on, raise your hand. Come on. It happens. So there's a loss there. You know, it's like throwing a good piece of salmon in the garbage can. You just lost yourself $12. How many of you get tired of unthawing things? And you know, safety-wise, okay, you know, putting it on the shelf for the day to unthaw, sometimes not the safest way, and then nuking it in the microwave, probably not the healthiest way. So it really is old school thinking, although we think we're modern day thinkers, to have a freezer and really put all your eggs in that one basket, putting all of our stuff as for long-term and even some short-term in that freezer. So let's blow the misconception that Starry's 100% anti-freezer. I'm not 100% anti-freezer. I want you friends to be successful, and I want to lower your risk. So let's talk about it. Off the grid freezers. If you go to Sears or Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever, you are looking at freezers that are manufactured for on-grid use. Remember that. Those Energy Star stickers mean nothing. You can count up all the kilowatts and all the watts that you want, but just remember this. The bottom line is a conventional freezer that you're buying at one of those places, even if it has an Energy Star, is a electrical hog. You're going to need a big battery bank and a lot of solar panels. Now, if you have that, you could probably run a small freezer quite easily. You can, but it's going to take up the majority of your electricity use. So you may have to really think off the grid and outside the box and look at something that is more practical for off-grid use, like a propane freezer. Or, you know, a lot of people have gone with the old-fashioned ice boxes and they buy the block of ice, but you know, you're still relying on, in the summertime, going down the road, right, and getting an ice block. Okay, where are you going to get the ice block? And if you know, I mean, think about it. How many places sell big ice blocks? So you might go to the store and buy a lot of ice, put sawdust over it. That's fine, but how long is it going to last? You still got to drive to the store. See, we always assess things according to risk. And I tell you what, we live a self-contained lifestyle. I don't want to be running to the store for ice. So if I can set it up. Okay, what about on-grid? Yes, on-grid, you've got a little bit of advantage. Get yourself a small freezer, but don't put your eggs all in one basket. Think about it this way. Say you raise meat birds like we did. You know, that's an investment. You got organic, healthy meat. You raised them. You spent time harvesting them. Why would you put all 12 of those meat birds, butchered, in the freezer? Why would you? Why would you put that investment in the freezer, all of it? You shouldn't. You gotta spread out your risk. So that's why in our pantry, look around. Here's our meat birds. They're canned. And if we want a whole bird, yes, in our freezer, we keep a couple. So that way, if the freezer breaks, or say all of a sudden, you know, you're on the grid and you lose electricity, Okay, you've got 3 whole meat birds to deal with. That's doable. That's how you have to think about your long-term food storage and even short-term food storage. So small freezer, keep it minimal with what you store. Be prepared if something happens to go on a can-a-thon and make it a practical can-a-thon. And one last thing, friends, I know one shoe doesn't fit all, and there are a lot of people doing things differently. I get that, and I respect that. But here's the big defining factor. We're all about succeeding here on our homestead and being prepared. And when we look around, we assess risk. We are risk assessors. We've lived this way all of our life. So when we see Tom down the road and he's got the freezer and he doesn't have a pantry, we see his risk. We see his vulnerability. And we're like, okay, we respect what he's doing, but man, that guy, he could lose everything. And then when we go down the road and we see Mary set up, and she don't have a freezer, but she's got the freezer down at Fred's place, and she's got a little bit of a pantry, we're looking at that and thinking, well, you know, Mary, she's vulnerable too. And we respect what she's doing, but she's vulnerable. So we want to lower your risk. We want you to be prepared, and we want you to succeed. So that's where we're coming from. One shoe does not fit all, but there is a practical, and you know, I'm going to be straight because the unicorn's leaving the room right now. There's a right way to set stuff up. There really is. So why not do it the right way? All right? So start building yourself a pantry. Get some canners. Start canning your stuff. Get a garden. And if you're going to have a freezer, keep it small. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. That is the recipe for homesteading success on or off the grid. And look at that, it's free. And we've lived through it to tell you the tale. All right, God bless, friends, and enjoy the last view of the homesteading pantry. Off the grid was Starry Hilder.